So today's Daf Yomi is Kiddushin Mem Beis. We're going to start on the bottom of Mem Aleph from the Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. On 41b, 4 lines from the bottom. The Gemara is in the middle of a discussion. How do we know that there's a concept of agency? How do you know you can appoint somebody to be your agent, your attorney? How do you know you can appoint somebody to do that in Jewish law? So the Gemara says yesterday 3 possibilities that the Gemara says. First, maybe we learn it out from the concept of a divorce. It says in the verse it says in the Torah you could divorce a woman through an agent. So maybe that's a source. The Gemara suggests a second source. The second source is from the tithing. You could ask somebody to take your truma for you. And then there's a third source, which is that you can appoint somebody to be your agent to bring the Paschal lamb. So the Gemara says, why do we need all 3 verses and the Gemara, all 3 sources? And the Gemara suggests reasons why we need all 3, that you can't learn out one from the other. And I think the Gemara says, well, what's the reason? How do we know? What's the source for the idea that you can appoint an agent by sacrificial food, that there can be an agent on your behalf? So the Gemara says, well, the source for it must come from the idea that says by the Paschal lamb, v'shachtu to kol kal da'at Yisrael. That was Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha said, that all of the community gathered together to slaughter the Paschal lamb. So the Gemara says, well, hanicho Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, that's only good according to the position of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. El Rabbi Yonasan, but according to Rabbi Yonatan, the mapik le'lahaikra l'drash achrina, he uses that verse to teach us something else, as we'll see in a moment. Minoan. So what's the source, according to Rabbi Yonasan, that you can have an agent for a sacrificial food, to do the sacrificial food on your behalf? And he because Rabbi Yonasan uses that verse to teach us something else. What does he use that verse to teach us? Rabbi Yonasan says, "Minayin shekol Yisrael kuan yotzim the Pesach echad." How do we know on the top of 42a? How do we know that all of Israel can fulfill their obligation with one Paschal lamb? Rashi says, even though there isn't an outsized portion for every amount, how do we know that all of Israel can fulfill their slaughter with one Paschal, can fulfill their obligation with one Paschal lamb, one lamb for everyone? So by the way, this is the proof that you can even be a vegetarian, even after the temple is rebuilt, because you won't need to actually eat from the Paschal lamb. You just need to have somebody sprinkle the blood. So one lamb needs to be killed for all of Israel. So what's the source? It says, "V'shachtu also called kal dat shel bein arbaim," that all the congregation will slaughter will slaughter it in the afternoon. Is everybody slaughtering it? No, it's impossible that everybody's slaughtering a lamb. It's not possible. One person will slaughter for everybody. So we see from here that everybody, and so therefore we see that one person can slaughter the Paschal lamb on behalf of everybody. Well, if that's the case, according to Rabbi Yonasan, who uses that verse to teach us that you don't need to eat the Paschal lamb, that there can be one Paschal lamb for everybody. How does he know that there can be an agent when it comes to sacrificial food? So he says, Minei. So he says he learns it out from this exact verse, because Rabbi Yonasan also learns it out from this verse. So it means to say he learns the verse that since everybody can fulfill it with one Paschal lamb, and one person can slaughter on behalf of everyone, that teaches us the concept on agency. The Gemara says, but maybe that's not a good proof. Why? That case is different because everybody's a partner in the Paschal lamb. So it makes sense that he could serve as your agent when he's your partner. But when he's not your partner, how do you know he could serve as your agent? So the Gemara says, we derive it from here. Where's the source? It says about the Paschal lamb, everybody was supposed to take one lamb for each household. So therefore, one person is taking it for the whole household. The Gemara says that's the same problem. There too also, they have a partnership, and that's why they're doing it. Everybody's a partner in the concept. It's not that one person is the agent on behalf of themselves. So the Gemara says, yeah, but from the fact that there's 2 verses saying the same thing, whenever there's 2 verses saying the same thing, we say one verse is to teach us that law, and the other verse is to teach us the other law. In Kain Trey Cry, why would we need 2 verses? So if only one of the verses is relevant, teaches there one where it's not relevant, where they're not partners, that you could still have an agent. The Gemara says, but no, we can't do that. But we need that verse We need that verse to teach us something else. What do we need that verse to teach us? We need that verse to teach us, says Rabbi Yitzchak, Ish Zocha V'lo Katan. Zocha, that a man can take the lamb on behalf of everybody else, but a minor cannot take the lamb on behalf of everybody else. So that's what we need the verse to teach us. So that only that's why it says that verse again. But so we can't learn the concept of agency. So the Gemara says, no, who may ish, and you can take Dr. Brazen, you can take those Gemaras in front of you. They have them there. So he says, no, that idea that a minor can't do it, we learn out from the ish lefiacho nafka. We learn out from a different verse. It says the ish lefiacho tachoso alaseh. So the Gemara says, vakatmi b'alei. We still need that verse to tell us the shulchan as a pesach al yachid. We need that verse to tell us that you could slaughter the Paschal lamb even if it's just one individual. You might have thought that you need a whole group to slaughter that, but let's say a guy's sitting by himself. Maybe he can't do a single, he says, I'm alone or I want to be by myself. I'm going to just do the Paschal lamb by yourself. How do you know that you can do it? So he learns that from this verse, Ishel Fiachro. Mara says, well, no. Rabbi Yona's son is Savar, Commander Amar. Rabbi Yona's son, he follows a different position. He says, Ein Shoftan es HaPesach al Yachid. So that you can't have the Paschal lamb if you're by yourself. You're not allowed to have the Seder by yourself. That's Rabbi Yonasson's position. So according to him, we need the verse to tell us the concept of agency. So now the Gemara says, so that's the first idea of how do we know that there's agency. We saw from these three verses, from the idea of either Paschal lamb, Truma, and divorce. But now we're going to see another idea that how do you know you can have this concept of agency? There are certain things in American law, which we were discussing yesterday, whether or not the agency doesn't work for them. Agency, maybe you can't even have an agent for certain things. Wanted to know yesterday, can you get married through an agent by American law? Maybe yes, I don't know. It depends on the state, obviously. Rav Gido Amarav, so, but there's a different source. What's the idea that you can have an agent? The Gemara says, according to Rav Gido in the name of Rav, we learn out from the fact it says, Nasi Echad Mimateh Tirchul and Cholas Arts. You should take one prince from each tribe, and they're going to divide up the land on behalf of everybody else. Typically, Shlichus Me'acha. Learn out the concept of agency from the idea that one person was representing the whole tribe to divide up the land. Gemara says, V'tizbara. Do you think that that's really an example of agency? V'tizbara dal shlichus. So, do you really think that's an example of agency? V'ketanim. There were Rashi has a different source, a different text here. It says there were also minors who were dividing up the land, and minors were receiving it. And do you think that they were able to receive it, and they were able to receive it? But we know that minors can't appoint an agent. So if that's the case, this is not a paradigm of agency. Minors were there, and minors are not an example of agency. And that minors can't appoint an agent. So this can't be the paradigm. So therefore, the Gemara says, what's the source? How do we know that a person can acquire something even though he's not there, that you can acquire something on behalf of somebody else? As it says, V'nasi echad nasi echad. So this is the idea that the prince can acquire it on behalf of somebody else, even though he's not there. The Gemara says, why? Why do you think he's doing something that's meritorious? Sometimes he's getting the land for him. He's getting a bad piece of land. Do you think it's merit for him? Sometimes he's doing the wrong thing. The prince would not get what you wanted. One guy says, I want it on the mountain. I don't want it in the valley. One guy wants it in the valley. He says, I don't want it in the mountain. So therefore, sometimes it's not a slus. So therefore, the Gemara says that pasuk is teaching us that it teaches us not about agency, and it doesn't teach us the idea that you can acquire something on behalf of somebody else's behalf, but rather, what's that pasuk teaching us? How do we know that orphans are coming to divide up the estate of their father and they're minors at this point, that the court can appoint an executor for their benefit or for their, even to their disadvantage. So why can they appoint them to their disadvantage? It means to say the court can do it. It can appoint it to their disadvantage with the ultimate upside. The court can appoint this executor so that he could be for the orphan's benefit, even if as a result of this there will be some disadvantages to them. The court can still appoint them. And what's the source of that? The source for this is from the fact that the princes got up there and divided the tribes on behalf of the whole state. We learn from here the principle: the court has the right to appoint an executor, even if not every decision that the executor makes on behalf of the orphan will be to the orphan's liking. When the orphan gets older, will say, I didn't want him to do this. Yeah, you didn't want him to do this, but he had to do this, this, and this. And so therefore, he was allowed to do something which was to your disadvantage. So now we go a little bit of a tangent. Amar Nachman Amar Shmuel, Yisomim Shabbat Lachok, the Nichsei Aviyam. Let's say you have orphans that are coming to divide up their father's estate. The court appoints an executor, and then the court is supposed to act in their best interests. And if the orphan grows up, he's able to object, and he's able to say, "Listen, I don't like what this executor did on my behalf. I don't like what the guardian did on my behalf. I object." Rav Nachman, by the way, Rav Nachman was the head of the court. He was the Av Vezin. He said, he says, sorry, if the court appoints the executor and then the orphans grow up, the orphans have no recourse. They cannot object. Because if that's the case, what power, what authority does the court ever have? If you're not allowing the court to object ever, then what authority does the court ever have? So the Gemara says, and Ve'atanan, and indeed we learned this in a Mishnah. This supports the position of Rav Nachman. Shuma Dayanim. Let's say the court evaluates a property. They evaluate a property that they said that. So basically, Shuma Dayanim means to say the court is evaluating the value of a property, and they evaluated the assets in order to sell them and to pay back a debt. And they made a mistake. Meaning to say the borrower owes this guy $1 million, and so the court says we're going to evaluate it and we're going to sell it. Now they made a mistake. They either added on a 6 or they lowered a 6. Now, generally speaking, in Jewish law, we have the law of onah, that when you sell something, that if you overcharge by a 6, the sale is void, or if you undercharge by a 6, it's also void. And if it's exactly a 6, you have to return it and return the extra money. But return the extra money that you overcharged. But if you did more than a 6 or less than a 6, it's disqualified. But if it be real estate, there is no onah b'kakakos. There's no overcharging by real estate, because real estate is all case specific, because it's all dependent on the location. So let's say you overcharge by a 6 or you charge less than a 6, machram bato, or then it's disqualified. Whereas Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says michran kayim. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says if the court makes the mistake, we don't apply this principle. Why? Because because he says the court has the right to make mistakes because the court is all powerful. So the Gemara is challenging Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says Nachman says that the power of the court, the orphan can never make a claim against the court, against the executor of the court, because if that's the case, what are you saying about the court's power? But in this case, we say that the law is like the Chachamim, that if they overcharge or undercharge by a 6, that the action of the court is disqualified. So the halacha v'amrav huna bar chanam Rav Nachman halacha is gedivrei Chachamim. The law is like the Chachamim. So if that's the case, the question of Rav Nachman himself. You understand the question? Rav Nachman says over here, he had said earlier that if the court makes a ruling, and the rule is that if the court makes a ruling, if the court appoints a guardian and the orphan wants to make a claim against the guardian, he can't do so, because if that's the case, what's the power of the court? But here, Rav Nachman says that if the court overcharges or undercharges by a sixth, that the sale is disqualified. So we see from here that even though the court made a ruling, we can overturn the court's ruling. So it's a contradiction in Rav Nachman. So the Gemara says, "Well, kasha, not difficult. Hard to toe, hard to low toe." So in the case of where of the overcharging or the undercharging of the six, or on top of 42b, they made a mistake. They made a mistake in their evaluation, and so therefore that was a mistake of the court. Where the case of the apotropos, they didn't make a mistake. It was just that the executor, that the orphans didn't like the decision of the executor, and so therefore that's not a mistake. So the Gemara says, well, 1 second, if he didn't make a mistake in that case, what's their objection? So the Gemara says, meaning to say, they said, you gave us one, you gave it to us in the area we didn't want it. You gave us in the south, we wanted it in the north. So that's like they said, I would have preferred it somewhere else. Well, you can't make that claim. That's the point. You can make a claim that the court made a fundamental error. The guy who was the clerk in the court miscalculated the evaluation. But you can't make a claim that I don't like their decision because I preferred it in the east side and you gave it to me in the west side. I prefer in Adams Morgan and you gave it to me in the Capitol Hill. Okay, so Amar Rav Nachman. This is another sugya which we've had several times in the tractate already. Rav Nachman says, and we had this in Gittin, we had this in Beitza, we have this in Baba Kama, Bechoros, this is 5 times in Shas. Let's say you have brothers who are dividing up their estate. We're going to consider them like purchasers from each other. We can consider them, there's different ways to look at them. We consider them as though they are purchasing it from each other. And so therefore they have the same law as purchasers. And what is that? That if they made a calculation error by 1/6, or by more than a 6, then we're going to say that it's disqualified. But pachos mishtelus, but if it's less than 1/6, nikna mikach. If it's less than a 6 error, then the sale is valid. And so therefore, if the brothers are dividing up the estate and the error is less than 1/6, it's a valid division. Yes, or al shtus, but if it's more than a 6, batal mikach, then the sale is canceled. Shtus, if it is exactly 1/6, kana or machzer or not, then it's a valid sale, but he has to return the extra amount. So, but amarava hadamra, that which we said pachos mishtus nikna mekach, that which we said that if it's less than a 6 in their division, then it's still a valid division in the sale, and it's a valid sale. Well, amran aladol shavia shliach. That's only when the assets were not divided through an agent of al shavos shliach. But if he appointed a lawyer to go and divide it up for him, then he can make a claim and he could say to the lawyer, "You were not acting properly as my agent. I sent you to do the right thing. I didn't send you to mess me up." And so therefore, if the lawyer messed up, he could say, "I wasn't serving him to be. I didn't appoint him to be my agent for this." The Gemara says, "V'hada amrin," and that which we said, yes, or mishtus, that if it's more than a 6, batal mikach, that the sale is canceled. Lo amran ela dulo amar nifligina b'shumad beidina. That's only the case where he doesn't say that's divided upon the basis of the division of the court, but where they divide it themselves, that's where we say if it's more than a 6, it's no good. Amar niflog b'shumad beidina, but say we're going to let the court divide it up for us, then michran kayim. Then even if it's more than a 6, we're going to say it's valid, because like Rav Nachman ruled, like we just said, if the court makes the evaluation, if the court makes the evaluation and they're more than a 6 or less than a 6, then the sale is canceled. So if you divide it up and it's more than, but Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says mechron kayim, and Rava is saying, I'm not ruling like the Chachamim, I'm ruling like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that if the court makes a mistake, if it's more than a 6, doesn't matter, we're going to follow the court's ruling. You got a question, Steve? So the Gemara says, So so here we say if the brothers divided, this is why you need to know all the laws, because if the court makes a mistake, according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, it's still binding, even if it's more than a sixth. And that third ruling, which we say that if the partners are dividing up the estate, they divided it by, they actually went exactly 1/6 over, and then its acquisition is valid, but you have to return no nah. That's only said by movables. By real estate, we don't apply this principle of ona that the sale is canceled more than a sixth by real estate. There's a lot of different theories why. One theory is because real estate is such a valuable commodity, people pay any amount. Another is that there is never a fixed price for the real estate. The Gemara says also by mekarka, also by real estate. We only say this that when do we say by real estate that there's no law of ona, that there's no overcharging? Only when they did it on the basis of an evaluation. Like, for example, their father left them several fields in different places. Some are good, some are bad. And one of them took the land that was good, and the other one took the land that was bad. And therefore, they had evaluation, and the person evaluated them as equal. There we say there's no one. But if they divided them on the basis of how much they produce, and one says this one produces much more than the other, that was a mistake. Low. Then we're not going to apply it, because then they're not really dividing up the real estate. Then they're really dividing up the produce of the real estate. He says if it's something that's a fixed amount, even if it's less than a sixth, you'd have to return it, because then you're just evaluating. You're saying let's divide the profits that are produced from here, and then even if it would be less than a sixth, you'd have to return it. So now the Gemara said something that this is the real action on the daf, but we're not going to have enough time to do it like we should. You could really spend a year on this, so yeah, but we'll say it quickly. That's our way. It's the daf yomi. Now, which we learned in the Mishnah, let's say I give hot coals to a little kid, and I send them out into your farm. Then I'm exempt by the laws of man. There's nothing anybody could do to me by Jewish law. I'm exempt by the laws of man, but I'm liable by the laws of heaven. So what's the idea? Because there's no agency. But shileach bi'apikeach. Let's say I give it into the hands of a nice 13-year-old boy. I give him the hot coals, and I say, go light that guy's field on fire. Then pikeach is chayiv. Then the person who actually lit the field on fire is liable, and the other guy is exempt. The guy who gave it to him is exempt. Why? If we just said that there's this concept of agency, why don't we say that the person who gave him the hot coals is appointing this other person to be his agent? If I give you the gun and I say to that, you go shoot him, you're acting as my agent. Why don't we say that the person who sends him off is also liable? Didn't we just say that there's this concept of agency? So don't we say that the concept of agency exists? Gemara says, Shani awesome. No, this case is fundamentally different. Why? Yeah, you can have an agency to do something on your behalf, to do a civil case, to do a mitzvah, to help you get married, but not to do a sin. You can't have an agency for a sin. Because the person who appointed this guy to be his agent can just say a very good response. You could have listened to me, or you could have listened to the teacher. Do you listen to the teacher or the student? You listen to the teacher. The Torah says not to do it. I told you to do it. Big deal. I'm nothing. If I told you to jump off a bridge, would you listen? No. You're responsible for your own actions. So there's no agency for sin. The person who does the action is responsible. He can't blame it on anybody else. What's the problem? He didn't do any action. He just told him to do it. He could say to him, I told you to do it. You shouldn't have listened to me. Doesn't matter. He should have said, you should have listened to me. You shouldn't have listened to me. Now, for the child, he said, you're liable by the laws of heaven. But he said, you're supposed to listen to yourself. Yeah, but it's not enough. It's too attenuated. So it says, you're responsible for your own actions. That's the point. Yeah, that's exactly it. You're responsible for your own actions. Not just my bosses, a lot of other people. A lot of other people have no liability. So the Gemara says, but there are three exceptions. And the Gemara is going to say there are three exceptions in Jewish law for the case of there's no agency to sin. Anybody know what the three exceptions are? Anybody know what the three exceptions are? To the principle that there's no agency for sin. Okay, we've done this many times. We'll do it again right now. We did it in Chagiga, we did it in Meila, we did it in Dharma, we did it in Ksuvos. So we've already done it this cycle 3 out of the 5 times that it appears in the Shas. We're now going to do time number 4. The Tanya, Shliach. So what about the fact the first case is coming to be by misappropriation of temple property? When it comes to temple property, there the agent is going to be the person who appoints the agent is also going to have liability. It's a verse. Vatanya, that which it says, Shliach shlichuso. Let's say there's an agent. So basically, the point is, you have a piece of meat, which is the temple's piece of meat, and you said to the agent, use this meat and make me a corned beef sandwich, right? If the agent does exactly what you said, then you're going to be liable for trespassing. But if the agent you appoint deviates from your request, then he's going to be liable. If the agent deviates from the request with the temple property, the shliach mal, the agent is the one who's responsible for misappropriation. Also shlichuso, but if he does exactly what you asked him to do, baal bias mal, then the person who owned the piece of meat and appoint him as agent, he's the one who's liable. Kiyasa shlichuso the baal bias, but why? If he does the agency of the agent, if he acts exactly like the person appointed him to do, baal bias miyamal, the person who appointed him is responsible. But why? So why don't we say here too, by the misappropriation of temple property, there's no agency for sin? Gemara says, well, that case is different. The misappropriation case is different. Shani mi'ila, the alpha chet chet mitruma. Because we have a verse. What's the verse? The verse is we learn out from the Truma. Ma Truma ma shvi shliach. Just like the case of Truma, you can appoint an agent to be your sin because of verse Gamatem. Av mi'ila ma shvi shliach. So too, by mi'ila, by a case of misappropriation, we could also appoint an agent. The verse says, "V'neilach mina." Why don't we learn from agency, from the misappropriation, that it works, that you can appoint an agent for a sin by misappropriation? Why don't we learn from all over Jewish law that you can always have an agent for a sin? So the Gemara says, "Mishum." Now we go back to the whole concept we had in chapter 1. That mishum because there's actually 2 cases where you can have an agency for sin. The first is misappropriation, and the second is shlichus yad. What's shlichus yad? Where you have, here's what I found. Where you have you're watching somebody else's property, and then if you're watching somebody else's property, you're not allowed to misappropriate it without their permission. It's a case of misappropriation also, but there it's not the temples, but you're watching somebody else's property. That's called shlichus yad. You use the property. Then all your exemptions no longer apply. Like normally you're exempt for an accident, but once you use it without permission, you're liable. So we say, so there it's also a case where there's agency, if there's liability for agency. Because we say, so they both teach us this idea. And we have a principle, whenever there are 2 verses that teach us the law in 2 cases, then we don't apply it more generally. Because that's why you need to say it twice, to say it's only in those 2 discrete cases. And anytime we have two verses that teach us the same law, we don't apply it farther. What's the case? And we have the verse by Meila that there's an agency for misappropriation. And how do we see this by misusing of a pawn? The Tanya, called Dvar Pasha, that it says in the verse that you have to take an oath that you didn't do anything wrong, that you didn't do anything wrong with your pawn. Beis Shammai says that you're liable if he thought to misappropriate the deposit, or if he said he would. So therefore, like basically, if he claimed it was his, Beis Shammai says at that moment, he's going to bear some responsibility. Mean to say that if before it was stolen, he thought that he was going to use it, then he's going to be liable as though he actually did it. Basil says, because there it's already in your possession, so how can you actually steal it? So by just saying it or thinking you're going to steal it, once it's already in your possession, it's like you stole it. Whereas Basil says, Basil says you're only liable once you actually do something to it, which you're not supposed to. So Amr Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, Avon Nemar are called Dvar Pesha. So what do you do with the words are called Dvar Pesha according to Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel? Amr Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, Avon Nemar and Lo Shalach Yadam Lachasrei. What do you do with my verse? So Beis Shammai says Beis Hillel Im Kena called Dvar Pesha Lamli. I'll tell you why. So he says Sheyachol Eli Ella who Amr Abdul Shlicho Minayin Tamalomar are called Dvar Pesha. So I might think he's only responsible if he did it himself. But let's say he told his agent to do it on his behalf. How do we know he has liability? So therefore, we see it from I'll call Dvar Pesha. And we see from here, Beis Hillel learns that by Shlichus Yad, the agency makes you have liability as well. So the Gemara says that works only according to Beis Hillel, but according to Beis Shammai, how does Beis Shammai know this principle of agency? Is only by me or not by anywhere else. So he has a different verse. On top of 43. And we'll do tomorrow. What's the case of Tvicha Mechira? But that's where you steal a sheep or an ox and then slaughter it or sell it. So there, to sell it, you involve another person. So also the slaughter for is done by another person, you're going to have liability, even though you didn't exactly slaughter the animal that you stole. You're going to be responsible for the punitive damages of 4 or 5 times the amount. But the basic upshot of all this is we see the concept as we go into Yom Kippur, Ein Shliach Dvar Avera. You cannot have an agency for sin. What does that mean? There's a lot of people we all want to say, oh, it's not my fault. This person caused me to sin. This thing caused me to sin. This extenuating factor caused me to sin. No, the basic teaching is this sin is on us. This sin is on us. There is no excuse. The one who does the action has no excuses. We bear complete responsibility for our actions. Complete responsibility. No extenuating circumstances are able to justify us. We can't blame our parents, our teachers, our lawyers. We can't blame anybody but ourselves. That's the idea. All right, we'll stop here. If anybody has any questions, happy to address.